Hello, welcome to Improving's Lunch and Learn with Aaron Petrie. Please post your questions here and we will get them during the Q&A. These sessions are recorded and available online at improving.com/virtual events. To ask a question during the presentation, please make note of the question mark icon at the upper right of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question answer feature, which allows you to send our moderator questions to be delivered to Aaron at the appropriate time. Thank you for joining us again, and Aaron, let's get started.
All right. Hi, welcome to Tech Interviews from both sides of the table. How to make the most of your interview opportunity, both as an interviewer and as an interviewee. So, who am I? My name is Aaron Petrie. I am a principal consultant for Improving. I am a terrible Twitter follower at @ampetrie, and there's my email address. I have been in this career for a long time, so I've seen a lot of different fads in interviewing. I also do this as part of my job on a regular basis for Improving. I've had IT jobs at 5 different organizations, so that means that someone decided after interviewing me to hire me at least 5 times, so I must be at least moderately successful, right? Well, maybe. We'll talk in a little bit about what a successful interview really means. But first, I want to talk about tips for the interviewee. So when you're preparing for an interview, preparation for an interview isn't always straightforward. Different types of interviews mean different types of preparation are necessary. This ought to be pretty obvious. That being said, there are certain things that are always a good idea. You want to learn something about the company. Maybe hit glassdoor.com, but maybe don't share what you find there with your interviewer. You want to check out their website. You want to Google them. If you know someone already there, you want to talk to that person and see what the company's actually like. You want to learn about the position that you're interviewing for. Read the job description as carefully as you can. Does it ask for 5 years of experience in a technology that's only 3 years old? That means that it was probably not written by the tech staff, but by HR guidelines. Read the technology that's in the job description. Finally, print up a copy of your resume and highlight bits of it that match the description. That way you can refer to it during the interview to call out, here's why I'm a good fit for this job. And last and possibly most importantly, make a list of questions that you want to ask about the company and about the position. At the end of the interview, you should be asked, do you have any questions? Good questions make a big impact. So let's talk about dressing for the job. It's worth asking about the culture when you're first contacted. For one thing, it shows an interest in the company and in the job, but they might also tell you what to wear. I've been interviewed in places where they are casual and they encourage the casual atmosphere, even in the interview, t-shirt, jeans, whatever. But unless someone specifically calls out to you, don't show up in a tie, it's probably a good idea to just assume business formal if you don't have any instructions contrary. All that being said, sometimes you show up in an interview and not exactly what you'd prefer to be wearing. You might be in a situation where dressing in a suit at the office tells everyone, hey, that guy's looking for a job, and you might not be ready to share that just yet. Then again, sometimes when you talk to them, they say, show up in casual. I had that happen to me once where they were very big on having a kind of relaxed atmosphere, and I showed up to the first interview wearing a shirt kind of like this and a sweater over it and khakis, and they said, no, we mean be casual, be yourself, we want to see who you are. So when I came for the second interview, I was coming from a funeral that I had been at directly before the interview. So I showed up in even more formal clothing. I was wearing a black suit and tie and a white shirt. And my interviewers looked at me and they said, we really wanted you to show us who you were. Is this who you were? And I said, I'm coming from a funeral, and they kind of felt terrible about it for a moment. And, we all had a laugh, and I did get the job in the end, so it turned out well enough. Another day, another resume. There's no reason that you should think that you have to be faithful to any single resume. It's a lot better to tailor your resume to the job you're applying for. Don't use the same generic resume for every application. It's important that you highlight your skills. I've seen a lot of resumes that just say things like, worked at this job for 5 years, worked at this job for 8 months, worked at this job. That's nice, but it doesn't tell me what you did at that job. If you can tie back the skills that you're claiming to have to actual job experience, that's going to make a bigger impact, and it's going to give me something to ask you about and talk about. A novel or interesting resume can really make your resume pop. Front-end design guys, you've got a little bit of an advantage here because you want to show off your cool design ideas. Those of you like me who prefer to do more server-side work or data work, it's a little, we're not generally as gifted in this. All that said, if your resume is too novel or too interesting, it can make it hard for someone to find important information. Finally, I've seen a lot of resumes, especially lately, that have little skill bars or ratings on a scale of like 1 to 10 of how good you are at a skill. It can be a good way to show an interviewer what you think your relative strengths are, but like I found that the more I know about something, the less I think I do. So it gives a sense of relative skills, but you may price yourself out of a position because you sit there and think, oh, I know how to troubleshoot a query and how to performance tune it and how to look at a query plan and how to set up query suggestions to make the query run faster, and I know about third normal form and normalization. That's kind of standard stuff that every database person has, 5. And the interviewer may think of that as closer to like an 8. All right, so when you get to the interview and people start asking you questions, what do you do when you're not entirely sure of the answer? Well, don't lie. It's not ethical. It's not justifiable. Even if you do get this job, you're probably not going to keep it. But you can listen to the question and try to reframe it in a way that's more helpful to you or that guides them to a question that you can give a better answer to. So ask them questions to clarify, look for more details. Doing this shows what you do understand and is therefore better than just saying, I don't know. But it also can kind of give you some hints or jog your memory and make you, oh yeah, that's right, I remember this now. You can also ask them why they're asking about something in particularly. If they ask, how do you implement a bubble sort? You might ask them, have you guys been having trouble with sorts in your code? That's kind of interesting. Is there anything that makes it so that you have to write a custom sort in your code and can't just rely on array.sort? Why would that be a problem in it? That's kind of fascinating. And then try to get them to talk a little bit about their code and ask questions that can kind of show your knowledge without necessarily showing that you don't exactly remember the most efficient way to implement a bubble sort. Just make sure you're not obnoxious about it. And again, it's also a way to kind of hide the irritation that some people I've talked to have when they walk in and they're asked, questions that are, what's the difference between double equals and triple equals in JavaScript? And they look at their resume and they're like, I've been writing JavaScript for 10 years and you're asking me this. Oh gosh. Asking them questions about, have you been having trouble with type coercion in your solution? Maybe, have you looked into a linter? Does your linter have rules about this? Is it part of your deployment pipeline? And you're offering them solutions as you're trying to clarify and get more information. And that's going to make you look a lot better than just sighing heavily and explaining the difference. Okay, so how you can kill your interview really fast. Never ever speak badly of your current employer. You're looking for a new job. Obviously, it's not as though everything is perfect. If it were, you probably wouldn't be looking. Lots of people have left a job because their boss was a jerk. Don't say your boss is a jerk. It's not going to help. Don't talk about how terrible they are, how they had unreasonable expectations, or how they were morons. You'd be surprised how many people go into an interview, and when I ask them, so why are you looking to leave? And they launch into how terrible their current job is. Don't overshare. Don't tell people that you love to go out on the weekend and get smashed at a strip club. If someone's asking about your hobbies, that's not what they're talking about. Don't show up late. I've worked with some HR people and recruiters that would cancel an interview if the interviewee showed up just 5 minutes late. If you can't be on time for a good reason, call as soon as you know that you're going to be late. Just a simple phone call, say, hey, I've been sitting on the freeway, there's an accident, and I've been here for 25 minutes, and I've gone 5 miles, and I probably have another 25 minutes before I get to your place of business. That's going to, number one, save your prospects, but number two, they're probably going to want to reschedule it for a different day, and you're going to be much better walking into that interview after you've had a day to cool off rather than immediately after you've been pounding your face against your steering wheel for 90 minutes about the traffic. And finally, and I feel like this shouldn't have to be said either, don't make inappropriate jokes. If, a good rule of thumb is, would you feel okay saying it to your mom? If not, don't say it in the interview or really in any work environment. Again, this is something that really ought to be obvious, and yet, in my experience, it's not for some people. All right, at the end of the interview, you get to the end and there's always that moment where the interviewer asks, do you have any questions for me? I'm going to save you some time now, milliseconds of thinking, and just say yes. Yes, you have questions for them. You're interviewing them just like they're interviewing you. You want to make sure that they are a good fit for you as much as they want to make sure you're a good fit for them. There's a lot of people looking to fill IT positions out there, and you've been sitting in this interview, and up until this point, the interviewer has had all the power. They've been asking the questions. They've been making you answer them. This is your chance to take control. Why on earth would you give that up? If you don't have any questions for them, generally it sounds like you're not that interested in them or in the job. That's probably not the impression you want unless you've decided in the course of this interview already, nope, I'm out. So what should you ask about? Well, ask them about their culture. Lots of people are very proud of their culture. Ask them about dress code. Show them that you're interested in fitting in and being a part of their organization. Another great question that I get from a lot of people is, how do you like working there? Or what's your favorite thing about the place where you work? Let them sell that job in that company to you. Finally, you can ask them questions about how they do their job. Find out about their SDLC, show them that you're looking to learn how they do work so that you can show up on day one ready to either conform to it or improve it. And I've had some people ask, was there anything that you were looking for that we didn't bring up earlier in the interview? This is kind of giving them back the momentum, but it is a good way to make sure that, if you were worried that there was something that you wanted to show off that you didn't get a chance to, maybe you can kind of guide them toward it. What should you never ask? In a tech screen, you probably don't want to ask questions about payment, compensation, and benefits. As a rule, the person you're talking to may not be the best resource for that. And for some of them, they get very uncomfortable talking about money, especially if you ask questions like, well, what do you make? That's one of those very awkward questions. So you're probably better talking to the recruiter or to the HR person that initially contacted you. So try and focus those questions on them. And try not to ask, how did I do? They might not know yet. They might have to sit with it and think about it, but it's also super awkward. Either you did great, in which case this question makes you sound a little needy, or you didn't do very well, and you'll know it the second it takes them, they take that deep breath while they think about how to phrase their answer, and you're just going to feel terrible. And it's like, yeah, okay, we can just call this now. It's kind of off-putting, so try to just wait and see. More specific questions that you probably ought to ask. There's a whole list right here at this GitHub site that I've read through, and they're all pretty good. There's like 150 last I checked. There's probably way more now. And I'm going to leave that up here while I go through a couple other ones. But if you're sitting here like trying to take notes or anything, make sure you get this web address. The slides will also, I'm sure, be made available. So a good question to ask is, what can I accomplish in the first 90 days to exceed expectations? That's going to show them that you want to know how you can stand out and be noticed immediately. You want to know how to be excellent from day one. And it'll also tell you if you can be excellent from day one, if this is a job where you feel like you're going to be able to do that. A good question is, what happens after pushback? If things go wrong, and if the team says, hey, we can't meet this goal, how do they resolve it? Find out how they manage conflict and how they manage, getting bad news. Because you're probably going to have days where things go bad, and it's good to know ahead of time what happens. How do we deal with that? Ask how they communicate how the business is doing. A lot of people who are looking for jobs are looking for a job because the company they were at ran out of money. Startups run dry, COVID happens, and they don't have a reserve to kind of push through. So it's important to know these things, and it's a good idea to ask about that ahead of time. And finally, tell me how code review and release works. Make sure you get a feel for their SDLC. I've worked at places where, they've said, yeah, for releases, we come in on Friday at 4 in the morning. If that's something that you're not going to be able to do, ask about it, Find out about it before you show up for your first day and they say, hey, this Friday, what are you doing at 4 a.m.? New guy brings donuts. So at the very beginning, I just said I'd talk about what a successful interview looks like. Seems obvious to a lot of people that a successful interview means you got the job, right? I don't think it does. At least not always. Did you get the title and the pay that you want? Did you get the culture that you wanted? If not, the interview probably wasn't successful. You're just kind of kicking the can down the road till you find that great job that is out there somewhere for you. Is the job the right job for you now and for your circumstances? I've worked places that I really loved working, but life changes and your circumstances change, or the company's circumstances change, and maybe one or both of you can no longer be what you need to be for everything to be great. Similarly, if you get a job and the job you get isn't the right one for you now, it's probably a bad thing that you won the interview. And finally, every job that you take has the opportunity cost of every job that you didn't take. So if you settle for the job that you score great on the interview today, but you've got another interview tomorrow, and you missed out on it because you took the offer from the first people, you didn't really have a successful interview. You just got a job. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about interview types. This is the part that's for both interviewees and interviewers. First, I'm going to talk about the pop quiz. This is where someone asks a question like the one on the screen. When does an object pass out of scope in C# garbage collection? Everyone has had these interviews before. It's the one where they ask all the top 20 tech screen questions that they Googled the night before. It's the pub trivia of interviews. It's okay if it's part of a longer interview or to get some tech skill baseline. It's also okay if you have a brand new developer and you really don't know, they don't have any job history for you to look at. Sometimes you kind of have to do that. If you're the interviewee, what this tells you about the person who's giving your interview is that they're probably pretty inexperienced at interviewing. This is often my first tech interview because it's the one that everyone's gotten. No one ever got fired for giving a pop quiz interview. Or it can tell you sometimes that people have had trouble with people lying on their resumes, and so they're trying to trip people up early on. Interviewers, make sure that if you're doing this, make sure that the questions that you're asking match the level of skill that you're hiring for. If you're hiring for a beginning programmer, don't ask them architectural questions. If you're hiring a new architect, don't ask them questions about, variable assignments. But the one thing I'd say is, instead of doing this, do maybe anything else. This is probably my least favorite type of interview to give or to get, mostly because all of it presupposes that we are not all connected to a global network that lots of tech professionals work with every day, that has a plethora of options available for me to get an answer instantly to any kind of question like this. You're really just testing whether or not they read the same list you did the night before, or whether they happen to remember that. And people get flustered sometimes with these, so I don't think it's a great way to go. So pros and cons list, it's easy, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what you want to know, doesn't tell you about people's tech skills, and it can be a little bit demeaning, especially if you're giving this interview to someone who has a 5, 10, 15, 20-year career, and you're asking them questions that are, very low level, that they're just kind of, it's just demeaning to ask them those questions. So next type, the whiteboard. This is where someone has you write out code. It's usually not too hard. They will sometimes have you do it on a whiteboard with pseudocode, or sometimes they'll give you a laptop, and the laptop will be set up and plugged into a projector with an IDE, and they'll say, okay, write some code to go to a database, pull a query, pull it back, and throw it into an HTML table, something like that. Usually it's something very simple. One of the problems with this is that it can make people very nervous. People get shaky when they're typing. What it can tell you about your interviewer, it can tell you that they're interested in seeing you actually write code. And that's a step up, honestly, from pop quizzes, right? It can also tell you, especially if they ask a lot of questions while you're typing, or if they kind of try to pair with you almost instinctively, that can tell you that this is someone who loves Agile, and that you're talking to someone in an Agile environment where they're expecting this as kind of how we do work normally. For an interviewer, this can make a lot of people very nervous. It can make them make mistakes that they wouldn't otherwise make. So you have to kind of grade on a curve. You have to kind of watch. You'll see people when they're doing this, their hands will be shaking as they're typing. So you know that you're freaking them out a little bit. So keep that in mind when you're kind of grading their work, that this is what's going on. A way to kind of reduce that pressure is to maybe give them a written example of code to refactor and ask them about that. And maybe walk them through, okay, how would you refactor this printed section of code? Look for things that you're looking for clean coding. Look for them, reducing nested loops and things like that. So pros and cons, it's very easy to do. You can give them some pre-printed code to discuss and verbally refactor to get where you want to go faster. That can also let you kind of direct what they're working on so that you can see a little bit better. Look for the things that you're actually looking for. The cons, it can take a long time. People tend to get very perfectionist about this. So they'll sit there and they'll refactor and they'll throw in, null, they'll throw in things like null checking on arguments and stuff when you're like, okay, yes, I know, but I really am just interested in seeing how you're thinking, not necessarily all of the gold plating there. If you're using a laptop, there may be some issues if they use a different IDE than you use. If you use VS Code and they love Eclipse, they might struggle with it. And let's not even talk about Vim versus Emacs, right? I mean, flame wars. And you probably don't want to rely on the interviewee's equipment. Owning a laptop with Visual Studio pre-installed was probably not one of the job requirements you posted. Why would you make it one of the job requirements in the interview itself? So again, it's probably a way to kind of a twist on this that works a little better, in my experience, is to pre-print some code that they can and give them a pencil and say, okay, how would you refactor this? Kind of draw it out and talk through it with them. Okay, the homework assignment. This is kind of the pre-printed code that they take home. It's usually a code challenge or a kata or something that you ask them to do ahead of time before they show up to the interview. So if someone gives this to you, what's this tell you about them as an interviewer? Well, they're trying to give you an opportunity to show off your code without you being under the pressure of having them watch you. It can also tell you that they like code katas a lot themselves, or that they've written one themselves, and maybe that's what you're working on. Unfortunately, this is not necessarily the best way to measure skill. So you're asking someone to go home and do this homework, and you don't really know if they did it or not. It's also a little bit iffy to ask someone to do unpaid work for you in order to do an interview. This isn't the worst technique about that. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's kind of right up at the line, and it's going to limit your pool of possible candidates, because if you're interviewing someone who, for example, is a single parent with kids during, say, COVID, the amount of spare time they have to work on your 8-hour homework assignment for your interview is probably pretty limited. So it can be a pretty high burden for a lot of people to clear in order to get through the door to join your company. So you're going to be limiting yourself to the kind of people who have a lot of free time to work on these homework assignments. So instead, maybe work on something very short together, like the whiteboard assignment. It's going to be more interactive, and it's not forcing people to have the privilege of time that they can afford to spend on this homework ahead of time. So, it is less pressure than the whiteboard. I mean, that is one nice thing about it. And you can get some interesting responses. Sometimes it's because people think in weird ways, and sometimes it's because they really want to impress you. But I can't stress enough, think about caregivers, think about single parents, think about people who have to take care of elderly family members. Asking them to put in extra hours outside their normal job hours for an interview can kind of limit the diversity in your hiring pool. So keep that in mind and make sure that you're okay with that, Quick aside, this is also related to the portfolio. This is, do you just have a Git repo I can look at? This is something that came out of the world of art and design. It was very common when a lot of people talked about the art of programming, that everyone should have their own portfolio that they can show off, and it's kind of stuck around with the rise of like GitHub and things that, oh, people just have this. It's not a substitute for an interview, nor should you assume that people have a Git repo that they can share with you. It's a good supplement, and if people have it, it's great to look at it. It can give you some good things to talk to them about when they show up. But not everyone can have this, and it shouldn't be a disqualifier. The ability to have time to work outside of your normal work hours is a privilege. A lot of people have work that's done under contract, so that most of their Git check-ins are under an NDA. And it's unreasonable to expect people to have spent their free time for years getting ready for your interview. So it's a really nice thing, but don't make it the only way that you hire people. Certainly don't turn people away because they don't have a good portfolio to share with you. Okay, so the pair or the on-site. This is where you bring someone in and they sit with you for a half a day or a day, and they work with someone on the team to pair on a problem. It sounds great on paper, because what could be a better way to find out if someone's a good fit for you than make them a part of the team for the day? If you're an interviewee and your interviewer wants this, it's going to tell you everything about them. You're going to really get a good feel for their culture and for them as an employer. People tend to be a little bit on their best behavior when they've got an outside person, but at least at first when a company starts doing this, but before long, people kind of get relaxed about it. It's also something that's often used by companies that have a very work hard, play hard environment. That's generally to say, expect long hours. As an interviewer, keep this in mind. You are asking someone to pay, either via PTO or just out of their time, a full day's labor to work for you with no payment on their own. And there are people that just flat out won't be able to do this. Number one, it's a red flag for your current boss that you're going to go apply somewhere if you say, hey, I want to take a day off. And, if they find out that you did this, it's the cat's out of the bag that you're looking. But also, from an ethical standpoint, the work that they're generating for you, are you comfortable putting that into production? I wouldn't be. And it's really, really a high bar for a lot of people to clear, just in terms of being able to do this. If having time to make a portfolio or to do a homework assignment was a burden for some people, this is obviously even more. Maybe instead turn your interview into just you pairing with someone for an hour on a problem. Are you really going to learn that much more pairing with them for an entire day than you would in an hour? I don't really think so. You might pick up something, but I don't think it's worth the cost or the kind of ethical tangle of doing this. But again, it is really great that people get to see the culture. You get to see their code. You get to talk to them about how they think. You'll get a great feel for how they fit into the team. But a lot of people can't do this. They just don't have the time. A lot of people won't do it because they'll say, yeah, I'm not investing that for an interview. I've got 5 others. I can't afford to take a day off for each of them and ask this of me. All right. Last interview technique, I promise. This is the conversation. This is where you bring someone in and you look at their resume and you look at what they've done and you ask questions to get to know them and to get to know about their work history and how they work and how they think. Interviewing. What this tells you about your interviewer is that they're focused on you. And it can tell you that they don't necessarily have a specific job requirement. They may be a consultancy or a contract place where they're just trying to get a feel for different places that they can slot you in. If you're an interviewer, this is a little bit harder to do. You need to be ready to ask some questions to get into details. You have to be ready to drill down into their answers to get a real sense of their skill level, and this can take some practice. Instead of practicing solo on this, maybe try pairing with someone who's done it before, get a feel for how to do it, ride along and get some experience before you jump solo. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. So for pros, you're really focused on the interviewee. You're getting to know them as a person, and you're getting to know what they've done, and you're focusing on them instead of using random questions and problems to try and trip them up. The way that you do this is you ask them a question about what they did, why they made the choices they made, what they learned from it. If you can, ask them a question about when you were doing this, did a specific technical challenge or hurdle come up, and how did you resolve it? Or ask them to tell you about technical challenges that came up. Cons, it takes a lot of practice to get it right. For new developers, they probably don't have a lot of history for you to drill into, and you probably need to read their resume before the interview to kind of get yourself prepared to talk about it. Okay, final section. Let's talk about being the interviewer. Should go without saying, but interview for the job that you're offering. How many people have had an interview where they've had a bunch of questions about intricate and complex coding, and then when you start the job, it's all about maintaining an old web forms app? It's like, well, that's not what we talked about in my interview. I don't know why you asked me that, but here I am. Also, there are a lot of jobs in line of business software maintenance out there, and you may be looking for an apprentice or journeyman to do that job. So why are you hiring someone who's writing their own operating system on the side? Number one, they're going to get bored. Number two, they're going to charge you a lot more than an apprentice or a journeyman would. You want to hire for the right fit. You want someone who's going to be engaged, challenged, and satisfied. If they're not engaged, they're going to make a lot of mistakes because you can't maintain interest in work you find boring. If they aren't challenged, they're not going to be engaged and they're not going to grow. And growth fuels satisfaction. If you're not satisfied, you aren't going to stay in a position. You're either going to quit or get fired. Incidentally, engagement, challenge, and satisfaction are the pillars of happiness at a job. You want to hire someone who's going to be happy. Is an interview really a success if you hire someone who leaves after 6 months and hates 5 of those 6 months that they're working for you? I submit that it's not. Be courteous to your interviewee. Number one, you're the one who has all the power, so be nice to them, be kind. Remember to offer water or some other beverage. They're going to be talking a lot. If the interview is going well, they're probably going to talk quite a bit. So make sure they've got something to drink so that they can talk. If you're an interviewee, and this is a tip that I need to move to the front of this, when someone offers you a drink, take it. Number one, you're going to be talking a lot and you're going to want it. Number two, it gives you something to do with your hands so you look a little less nervous. Similarly, make sure that your interviewee is in a comfortable seat, that the room isn't too hot, isn't too cold. Make sure they're not staring into the sun. This is the first impression your company is giving to this person. Make sure it's a good one, and it's one that shows that you care about them. If you're expecting it, be on time, be punctual. If you're expecting the interviewee to be on time or to be early, make sure that you're at least on time. Showing up late to interview someone isn't a power move. It's a jerk move. In the same vein, respect their time. Don't run over, or if you think you're going to run over, ask them if it's okay. If you want to give at least 10 minutes for them to ask you questions at the end of a half-hour interview, make sure that around 20 minutes in, you pause and ask them, hey, I have a couple more questions I want to ask you. We're scheduled for a half hour. I want to give you some time. Is it okay if we run over, or do you have somewhere you have to be after this? Most of the time, they don't have a problem. But if they do, it's probably because they have something very important that they couldn't schedule around. Finally, if you want to do a second or a third interview with someone, make sure that you're prompt in scheduling it with them. Don't drag the interview process out over a month just because you can't find time to schedule the second interview. If you're going to take longer than a week to schedule it, they're probably going to have taken another job by then. Okay, have a conversation. I am very biased towards the conversational style of interviewing. It's the one I've had the most success with, but it's fair to ask, how do you do this well? Look at their resume and look for the things that they've worked on that you find interesting. You want to root the interview in the history of the person you're talking to. Ask them about what type of work they're passionate about doing. Sometimes you'll get answers that aren't really great, like, I like solving problems. That's kind of interview speak for, please just hire me. If you get that, dig a little deeper. Ask them about what sort of technology they like to work with and why. Do they like to work with UI and UX problems? Do they like to work with big data? Those are very different things, and those are very different conversations that you can have. Ask about their past work. Ask why they made specific decisions and why they didn't make other ones. If they weren't the ones who were making the decisions, ask what problems they saw, what went well, what didn't, and what they wish they might have done instead. If it was further into the past, ask what new technologies might have helped solve the problems that they had. That'll tell you whether they're keeping up to date. Finally, a question that I really love to ask people is, what's the coolest thing that you've ever done or the thing you're most proud of? You get some interesting questions, some interesting answers, and I deliberately keep it open-ended and don't limit it to IET just to see what people come back with to kind of find out what their priorities are. One guy told me about a system he wrote in C# that used COM to connect to an FLIR camera to track where a gun was pointed when fired and where the bullet hit to track the score and ballistic paths at a shooting gallery in real time. That was the coolest thing. I was just like, wow, that's awesome. Another guy told me that it was his son and watching how he developed and how he learned. Both told me interesting facts, and both told me different things about what kind of developer they would be. You know, one tells me this is someone who's very interested in technical problems. The other tells me that this is a developer who may be more interested in talking to people and trying to solve the problems that people are having, which is an important skill set also. What should you never, ever, ever ask about in an interview? Well, I'm not a lawyer. Your mileage may vary. Consult local conditions. This is not legal advice. This is just advice about how not to have a stupid interview. Some of it will probably help keep you from getting sued, but this isn't a comprehensive list of what you can or can't ask from a legal perspective. Consult your HR department. But don't ask, how old are you? Age discrimination is a thing, and in our industry, it's a big thing. There are lots of places that don't like to hire older developers. It's dumb and it's illegal. Don't be that guy. Don't ask anything regarding sexual orientation, including, are you married? First of all, it's an interview, it's not speed dating. Don't be skeevy. Second of all, there are issues of discrimination. Don't be that guy. Don't ask anything about religion or politics, and I'm including conspiracy theories here. This should be obvious, but come on. The only time that this potentially could ever matter is if you're interviewing someone to become a pastor, and you're not doing that. Don't ask whether they have kids or whether they're trying to have kids. First of all, that's kind of terrible, but it also gives the message of, I don't want anyone to work here who might have outside stuff in their lives that's more important than their job. And it's kind of a backdoor way to ask questions about marital status. Don't be overly friendly. Again, don't be skeevy. I've met people who are very touchy-feely, who like to put a hand on your shoulder when they talk to you. In an interview, absolutely do not do this. It will make a lot of people uncomfortable. As I said earlier about interviewing, don't make inappropriate jokes or comments. Just don't be that guy. All right, home stretch. what does a successful interview look like, actually? I would argue that it's not getting the job and it's not filling the position. A good hire is going to meet the needs of the organization. They're going to fit the culture of the organization. They're going to grow over time, and they're going to stick around. Those are the important things that you want out of any hire, because you don't want to be trying to fill this position again in 6 months, and you want them to help grow your business and grow your organization. Success also means not missing out on a hire because you weeded them out ahead of time, either through what interview technique you were choosing or through not understanding what they were saying in the interview process itself, or by coming off badly in the interview as the interviewer and making them feel like it wasn't the fit for them. So that is my presentation. Again, my name is Aaron Petrie. That's my email address. I'm a terrible Twitter follow. You should follow Columbus Talk instead. It's the Twitter feed for Let's Talk IT Columbus. Please help me make this better. Tell me what you liked, what you didn't, and what you were hoping for, and how I failed to meet those hopes. Thank you very much for your time. And I think we have some time left for questions.
Hey, Aaron. I do
Hi.
have a few questions for you.
Go ahead.
First question is, do you worry when a developer's resume has poor formatting, capitalization, or grammar errors, but it meets your basic criteria? We are asking them to code, not write text. I've heard different opinions on this and curious what you think.
Well, one thing it tells me is that they didn't ask anyone else to look at their resume and to check over it. And that kind of makes me worry a little bit about how they might feel when I say, all right, it's time for a code review. So that would be the big concern I'd have. The other thing is that, you know, as developers, we're supposed to be solving problems that people have, not problems computers have. And if you cannot communicate clearly with people, that part of the job might be hard for you. You know, the figuring out the problems people have part.
Thank you. The next question I have here, is it okay to be a person who does not like coding much at home? I really enjoy my life, my hobbies, and I truly dislike encroachment of my profession on my personal time.
I think it is, absolutely. I'm of the opinion that, you know, it would be ridiculous if you were looking for a plumber and you said to him, so what kind of fountain do you have in your backyard? What kind of pipe fitting do you do in your spare time? And yet that's a question that we routinely ask developers. And it's one that I'm not entirely sold on. Now, that's not to say that I don't necessarily think that people shouldn't get involved in their local development community. That's just building a good network, and that's being social and talking to people, and that's trying to learn more. But the idea that you have to contribute to open source or you have to code in your free time to be a developer, I push back against that personally.
Thank you for that answer. The next question I have is, I have been doing take-home problems more often for interviews now as they've become popular, and sometimes I spend maybe 4 to 5 times more hours than what they say the estimate is to make me complete the problem. I think this is because I try and make it look extremely perfect rather than a rougher solution of the problem. Do you think this is necessary, or should I spend less time?
So I would say that for take-home problems, number one, if you're assigning them to people, make sure that you make the expectations clear. You know, let them know that, look, I'm not grading for did you put in all the null reference or the null argument exceptions and things like that. I just want to get, you know, the general business logic out. Similarly, if you're someone who's filling it out, ask that question. Say, you know, you gave me 2 hours for this or whatever, or said it should take about 2 hours. Normally, I would be spending time also writing in all these null checks and writing in all this error handling and building up all this stuff. Is that what you're looking for? Or do you just want me to write the logic for how to solve this problem? There's no reason not to ask questions to get more clarity. And as an interviewer, I would think nothing less of someone who did. I would be impressed that they spent some time ahead of time looking at it.
Thank you. The next question is, I'm not good on my feet thinking on the whiteboard and I get nervous around others. I'm used to solving problems kind of at my computer or workstation when I've had time to think about it. How do I handle the whiteboard situations, to account for this?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I don't think it's a great interviewing technique personally, because I've seen a lot of people who get very nervous about it. It's one of those things. It's like public speaking or stage fright. The best way to get over it, honestly, is kind of practice, which is terrible to say because you obviously don't want to practice interviewing a lot. But ways you can practice that outside of interviewing are with like brown bag lunch and learns in the office. Get 4 or 5 people together and say, hey, I want to learn, Elm, or I want to learn React, or I want to learn whatever. Let's pick a code cutter. Let's pick a problem. Let's get together over lunch and we'll type through some stuff, and that gets you used to coding in front of other people, so that when you get to that point, you kind of are prepared. Sorry, I don't have a better answer than just kind of practice.
Practicing is good advice. The next question I have, and I think this may be our last question, is recruiters often ask how much I currently make in the very first recruiting phone screen, but my goal is to get paid more, as I think I'm significantly underpaid. How do I handle not answering this question in a way that really limits me going into an interviewing situation?
You can ask them instead I've heard people say things like, what are you looking to pay this position, instead of answering that question. Answer with a question. That's my general advice when someone asks you a question in an interview that you don't want, is to answer with a question of your own. And so then you can redirect towards what you actually want to make the answer be. So ask them, what are you looking to pay the person that you're hiring here?
Well, thank you, Aaron. Those are all the questions I have for today. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, just thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate very much you taking an hour to come and listen to me yammer on. I think that we're terrible at interviewing as an industry, and I don't have any magic secrets, but I'm hoping that as people talk and think about it more, we get better.
All right, and thank you everyone for joining us today on Improving's Virtual Lunch and Learn with Aaron Petrie. Again, if you want to see a recording of this session or any of our sessions, you can go to improving.com/virtual events. You may also go to our YouTube channel, just search Improving. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a great weekend.